How fast is the Ferrari F2004? This car is incredibly iconic, as it was driven by none other than Michael Schumacher in 2004. The car won 15 of the 18 races that season and also boasted 12 pole positions. This car also helped Michael Schumacher win his record-breaking 7th World Championship. It was truly dominant. One thing you may not know is that in 1998, Formula One required all cars to have grooved tires. Why, might you ask? Because the cars were too fast. As opposed to completely flat, slick tires, grooved tires reduce the overall contact with the road, slowing the car down. So even with grooved tires, how does the F2004 hold up to today's standards? Here's how it's going to work. I'm going to set my 2 fastest lap times around 2 different tracks with the F2004. The first lap will be my fastest possible time around the Red Bull Ring, and the next will be my best time around Suzuka. Then I will compare these lap times to 2 other modern cars. These 2 tracks have some different key elements, so it will be a good test of the 2 cars. As for the lineup of cars, we have the Ferrari F2004, obviously, the Mercedes W11 from 2020, and the RedBull RB19 from this season. These cars were both dominant during their season, so it's a pretty fair matchup for the F2004. Getting into our lap around the Red Bull Ring, the F2004 definitely feels light and nimble. While turning into the corner, the front end is immediately responsive, which is something that doesn't feel the same when driving the newer cars. It feels powerful on the straights, and braking is pretty good. I don't feel like I'm going to lock up the front tires at all into the heavy braking zones. However, it is very snappy on corner exit, and it feels like there's a weird bite point where the throttle suddenly kicks in. This definitely makes it harder to exit the corner effectively. As for rotation, the car feels stable and it doesn't have too much understeer due to my setup, but medium speed corners where you have to brake while turning is definitely a big issue for the F2004. When in these types of corners, the rear end loves to kick out or just do something weird, and it's hard to figure out what in my driving style is creating this issue. Overall, the F2004 is definitely quick and nimble, but there are a few raw mechanical aspects of the car that are difficult to manage. It feels pretty quick into the corners, but exiting is a bit of a struggle due to those issues with the rear spinning up, but overall, this lap definitely felt pretty good. The Mercedes W11 is absolutely planted around the Red Bull Ring. This car is famous for being one of Mercedes' best creations, and you can understand that the second you start driving it. The amount of grip this car has is crazy, and it's definitely a step up from the F2004. After driving the W11, I realized that the Ferrari felt like I was driving on ice skates, and the Mercedes is how an F1 car should feel. That being said, it also feels a lot bulkier than the Ferrari. Even though it has incredible grip, it feels like you have to exert a lot more effort into the corners and even turn in a bit early to compensate for the weight of the car shifting around. Traction out of the corners is fine for the most part, and braking in the medium speed corners compared to the Ferrari is night and day. The car is just generally more planted to the track and a lot easier to drive, however it feels bigger. Around a track like Austria that's fine, but the tighter, more precise circuits would definitely be more difficult in the W11. Due to the sheer amount of grip compared to the F2004, this lap felt pretty fast. I was confident on every corner, but the car did feel a lot bigger and heavier. Overall, this felt like a pretty solid lap. The Red Bull RB19 is one of F1's most dominant cars ever. This season they have won every single race barring Singapore, so I'm expecting a big difference compared to the F2004. Through the corners, this car feels even more planted than the W11. One major improvement above both the cars is the traction. On almost every corner you can stomp the throttle down without worrying about wheel spin or spinning out. The car just keeps the grip that well. Even slow speed corner exits in first gear don't have much of a risk of spinning, which is totally insane. One thing to mention is how bulky this car is too. It feels even larger than the W11 and naturally feels a little understeery due to the sheer size of this car. Compared to the F2004, it feels 2 tons heavier, and although it's probably faster through medium speed corners due to the grip levels, it doesn't feel very fast at all. It's hard to explain, but it doesn't feel like I'm going very fast at all in this car. It's just so big. Overall, the RB19 is big and bulky, but it's an insane grip machine. Overall, this lap felt really good compared to the F2004 and the W11. I was confident into every single corner, and throttle on exit was a breeze. I expected that Suzuka would be a much more difficult track for the F2004, however, it performed better than I thought. Into the first corner, the rear end behaved a lot more than it did in Austria, and it kept much more grip. Obviously this could be setup related, but I was pleasantly surprised nonetheless. Through the S's it also maintained grip, but I had to lift into the left-handers, which is not necessary in the newer cars. However, traction on exit was much better than it was in Austria, and I could trust the car a lot more when pushing the gas. It seemed to have stopped with that weird instability issue I had in Austria, so I suspect it was indeed a setup issue. Braking through the medium speed corners felt really good as well, and the car didn't want to just snap into a spin the second I turned the wheel after trail braking. These are all improvements, but I did notice some negatives too. The corner rotation was okay around Suzuka. It felt like I had a little bit more understeer into the corners than I did in Austria. I had to be a bit more careful into the corners as opposed to chucking the car into it. However, once mid-corner, the car behaved nicely again. Braking into heavy zones felt a little dull, and I noticed I had to brake just a hair earlier than I thought I had to. I had the brake pressure set to 100%, so it was not a setup issue, just the nature of the car and the nature of the track. Overall, the F2004 felt surprisingly stable around Suzuka, however it lost a little bit of that nimbleness. The W11, again, was absolutely bolted to the floor around Suzuka. It felt incredibly safe and easy to drive. Into the first corner, I didn't even have to lift, just flat out until the braking zone at the second right-hander. From that first corner, I knew I could take it pretty aggressively through the S's. Opposite the F2004, I could go flat through the left-hand S's, and medium-speed braking through the rights was very easy, and the car kept all stability. It kept the grip pretty well, and I could stomp the throttle down pretty much mid-corner. Braking into the heavier zones was good, but I felt like I went a little deeper than I expected to in some of the corners. The W11 definitely felt less bulky around Suzuka, and the rotation through the corners was a major factor in displaying this improvement. I felt much more confident braking and turning into the corner at my normal point, rather than a split second beforehand. The weight seemed to be better balanced somehow, and this massively benefited rotation as well. This lap felt good, and I had a good line through almost every corner, and the setup was pretty balanced. Overall, the W11 was definitely better suited to Suzuka in terms of stability, but I'm not really sure about overall speed. It didn't feel too much faster than the F2004, and I felt like the track suited both of these cars pretty well. The RB19 was absolutely insane around Suzuka. Similar to the W11, it was bolted to the floor the entire time. Into the first corner, I did have to lift before the double right, something that the W11 could do flat out. However, traction out of the first corner was light years better than the W11. I could jam the throttle completely without worry at all. Through the S's, medium braking was a breeze and the car behaved perfectly. It felt completely stable and there was never a feeling of impending snap oversteer. Into the heavier braking zones, the RB19 felt much more soft than the W11, if that makes any sense. The W11 felt a little bit more harsh, and there was a bigger margin of error in terms of locking up, but in the RB19 it felt like a lockup was near impossible. Mid-corner rotation did still feel a little bit bulky. There were some sections of the track that the car felt like a boat. Driving through the hairpin and getting full rotation around the corner was one of those times, but the fast double lefts after that felt the opposite, as the car had so much grip. Overall, the RB19 felt like a dominant car, and even though it was a little bit bulky around some of the corners, it made up for it with downright grip, more so than the W11, and much more than the F2004. So here are the overall lap times from each car. The F2004 was the slowest of them all, however being almost 20 years old, there was not much of a difference between that and the newer cars. The W11 had a lot of grip, and compared to the Ferrari it was a massive difference. However, the RB19 trumped the W11 in terms of grip, and it was by far the easiest car to drive. So there you have it, a comparison between the F2004, the W11, and the RB19. If you want to see more videos like this, leave a comment on this video or in my Discord, which is linked in the description. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.